My name is Daff Crane, and with me is Jane Costello. We're both senior instructional designers at the Center for Innovation in Teaching and Learning. This afternoon, we're going to talk about providing feedback. So Jane, if you'd like to progress to the next slide. Okay, you can see a quote here. Nothing that we do to or for our students is more important than our assessment of their work and the feedback that we give them on it. The results of our assessment influence our students for the rest of their lives and careers. If we get it right, fine if we get it right, unthinkable if we get it wrong. And the next slide is our outline. So we're going to talk about the when, the why, the purpose, synchronous and asynchronous feedback, feedback within, bright space, and then a really nice summary. So when do we provide feedback? You can unmute yourselves to answer that. Or you can type in the chat. It's up to you what you do. Anybody have suggestions?
Yes, Jane, we are seeing the presenter's view, as Leslie just mentioned in the chat, rather than the full slide, the presentation view.
Okay, sorry, it didn't come up as I intended. Just one moment, please. And here we go. There, that should be much better. Sorry about that, everybody.
Perfect, thank you. So Leslie has just said in the chat, after an assessment.
Perfect. Mano, are you trying to say something? We can't hear you if you are.
No, I was trying to say the same thing after an assessment or a test.
Okay. So we provide feedback all the time. It's in our facial expressions, our posture, our clothing, the tone of our voice, our choice of words, the enunciations, our spelling errors. And in an academic setting, we provide feedback to others all the time in our reactions to discussions, meetings, and during class. And then in the formal settings, we provide formal feedback on evaluation items, as we have discussed. So if we could go to the next slide, Jane. We'll talk about why we provide feedback. We provide feedback for the benefit of learners. It lets learners know that they are doing well. We provide suggestions for improvement. It provides motivation for students. And to me, the least important one is that it provides a grade. And I know that from the registrar standpoint, that's probably the most important one. But for a student's learning, it should be the least important. Jane, can we have the next slide for the purpose of feedback? And So it's identifies how learners are achieving their desired goals, what's going well, what the misconceptions are, what the challenges are. You've spent hours on a module and the students have done a lot of work with it. It's gratifying to see how well they do and to provide that feedback to them. So I'm going to pass it over to Jane now, who's going to talk about learner-centered feedback, among other things.
Hi, everybody. So I'm Jane Costello, and as Steph mentioned, we work together at CITL. And I'm just going to leave my video on for a moment so that you can put a face with the name. And so we want to look at why when we provide feedback, why it should be student-centered. It's important to focus on the learner directly. It helps them in their learning. It helps them confirm their learning. And the feedback provides them with an opportunity to think about the assignments that they're doing beyond just completing something to get a grade. It can help students to gain confidence and also to learn how to reflect upon their own work and how well they're doing in terms of being able to master the content that was presented to them as part of the course. And also it can help students develop critical thinking skills, which are highly valued today. So there's some approaches that can be used when providing feedback. For example, I'm not going to read all of them. Critical thinking, use of checklists and rubrics. There may be a program that uses competencies, or quite often professional degrees and programs have competencies involved. It can be self-assessments or self-checks are another way to provide feedback. And of course, it's important to provide, when you're using formative assessment throughout your course, it's also important to provide continual feedback throughout the work as well. Okay, so one thing that we need to keep in mind when we're providing feedback is to try to avoid potentially funny statements, because as Jenny Priest notes, one person's clever joke is another person's offensive insult. And providing feedback is not really an appropriate time to share your humor with your students. On the other hand now, guidelines, in terms of guidelines, feedback should be timely, constructive, clear, concise, and motivating for students. It should provide suggestions on what to improve and how to improve the work that they submitted. There should be a focus on the content and the criteria. So if you've provided students with the criteria of what should be included in their assignment and how it should be included, and how they're going to be marked, that will help them know the level that they're reaching for when completing the work. Regardless of what else you do, avoid putting a huge X through a piece of work that a student submits. And one other thing, many students seem to be off-put by grading or marking things with the color red. And so some people suggest using an alternate color, like purple, or if they've written with black, then use a blue pen to record your comments, or vice versa. One other thing I should mention before we get into the feedback methods is that the feedback needs to be constructive. You should always start with a positive statement or comment about the work that they've done, something encouraging, because it'll entice them to read further on. This feedback should be specific as you go through their work, and where possible related to the course materials, resources, readings, notes, that's those items, and provide a summary at the end. You can point out what you like and then point out areas that they need help with, and if they need help with their writing in terms of style, then you could always direct them to the writing center. So Daph is gonna, we're gonna go back and forth here, and Daph is going to kick off with some feedback methods, and then she'll switch over to me. Please remember that you can ask a question at any time during our session. Okay, Daph. And as eloquent as we are, sometimes we forget to unmute.
That's right. Thank you, Jane. So we're going to talk about the asynchronous feedback and then synchronous or instantaneous feedback, and then feedback within Brightspace. So if we look at the asynchronous, if we could have the next slide, Jane. It's text-based, where we just use the comments feature in Word. Very easy to use, very clear for students to read it. If we look at the next slide, we can use the columns feature in Word. So at the top, you have a little bit of space for the general feedback, your strong points at the beginning, and then you put the work in the left-hand column and your comments in the right-hand column, or you can reverse the columns if you like. It's just a case of using columns. We can use screen captures. So here, I've used a screen capture and used the pen within screen capture to circle a component. And then I've used the text feature within the screen capture to accentuate a comment. There's a wide variety of tools that you can use that are freely available. You can use, you can buy or purchase Snagit, which is about $60, or Screen Hunter, which is totally free. And a lot of times these days, something will come with your computer. So if we look at the next slide, we have PDF markup. So it's just taking a PDF and using the markup tools within PDF to record your feedback. You can use sticky notes, highlighting, or if you have a tablet, you can use your pen or your stylus to provide feedback. So handwritten comments. We could have the next slide, Jane. Thank you. So this is just the traditional pen and paper. If you're not comfortable providing it electronically, you can use just pen and paper, scan it, take pictures of it, and return it to the student. And email text messaging. You can send feedback through an email message or as an attachment to the email. You might find text messaging useful. You can see here that somebody's done a message. Great work, 9 out of 10. Speak later. Please contact me. And then their initials. So that's quick and easy. But you still want the student to contact you so that you can provide detailed feedback. I'm going to pass it over to Jane now, who's going to talk about audio and video feedback.
Great, thanks, Taf. So some I guess some guidelines or some things to keep in mind when you're using audio files to provide feedback is to be sure to include the student's name in the file name. And you could also consider adding the name of the assignment as well. Excuse me. And some people like to put the date in there as well. When in the file name, when you start your recording of the audio, identify the assignment name, student's name, the date that you're giving the feedback, and your name in the audio file. It's important to speak clearly and slowly so that students can fully understand what it is that you're saying. And be sure to sign off any audio files with your name, as well as a way for students to contact you, either through your office hours, through email, through Brightspace, discussion forum, however it is you choose to do that. You can send the raw files, or you can embed them in the document that was submitted. Now this will expand the size of the document, so you have to keep that in mind. Typically, if you send the file back as an MP3, most everybody will be able to record it. Will be able to play it. There are tools out there that can help you record if you're using a computer. One that we promote is Audacity, and you can record your feedback. You can do some minor editing with it. It has an editor in it, and then you can save it as a MP3 and then share that file back with the students. There's also means to provide audio feedback from within Brightspace, and we're going to show you some of that a little bit later. Then we have video feedback. So all of the recommendations for audio feedback apply, but in addition, you also have the visual nature. So you could be recording you're walking through the student's work on your screen and marking it up. For example, if you have a stylus and you're able to mark up your screen as you go. Sometimes you're able to provide a better explanation to students if you can show them exactly where they may have gone wrong or other approaches they could use to complete the work. There is a period of time required in order to learn and become comfortable with the various software, but most of them are fairly intuitive. There's several that are free for you to use. Cam Studio, Captivate, Camtasia, and ScreenFlow. And we've had we've worked with many faculty who've used each of these different products, and once they get beyond the very initial orientation to the system, then they're usually very adept in a short period of time. Okay, so most of those were for asynchronous feedback. It is also possible to provide synchronous feedback to students. So that's feedback when you're communicating with them in an exchange at the same time. So it involves obviously two-way interaction, or that may be yourself and another instructor providing feedback, or you're providing feedback to a group of students. It's definitely the method of choice when there's poor performance by the student. And it's important to be aware of the your body language, tone of voice, as well as the response from the student, but also the student's body language, their tone, and how they are interpreting your actions and interaction. It's important to invite further discussion if the student wishes to reflect upon what you had to say and wants to find out more information at a later time. The reason it's the method of choice for poor performance is because you're better able to read how the student is receiving the messages and receiving the feedback. And you can more easily determine if you should go through everything or introduce some of the major areas or issues with the work, and then invite the student maybe to reflect upon it and then go over it in more detail at another time. When you're speaking with a student, for example, over a phone, you can sometimes pick up on some cues in the conversation, but with video, you get to see the student. And of course, face-to-face, we mentioned, can be done by video or it can be done in person. These days, this semester certainly, and likely the upcoming semester, the in-person face-to-face may not be practical, but we will be able to return to that state hopefully come the fall semester. So some of the tools or technologies that you can use, we mentioned face-to-face, we mentioned the telephone, VoIP, which is voice over IP. So this would be things like Skype, net meeting, and actually some of the telephone systems now function on VoIP as well. Web conferencing in a tool such as we have here. Text chat, and Dash showed you an example of a text from a phone. Or in your Brightspace learning environment, there is a chat feature. And years ago, we used to have instant messaging or Messenger as a type of text chat, and Yahoo. Okay, so another particular type of synchronous feedback is automated feedback that's built into an artifact that may be on your content page or on a web page. So in this example here, this is a matching activity where the students are asked to locate a particular country in South America. And when they click on one of the countries, if they get it right, then the name will appear with a line drawn to it. If they get it wrong, then they get a button to try again, and they can try to choose another country. So the feedback would be try again in this case. Now the feedback can be much more detailed or it can be very brief. Again, that'll come down to the type of feedback that's being provided, whether it's formative to help students learn during this semester for you to monitor their progress, or whether it's a more formal assessment that's cumulative and usually happens at the end of the term, which we call summative. A nice thing about some of these interactive automated feedback is that students can do them multiple times. And it's possible, depending upon the programming, to introduce randomized options. Now, this one was created by one of our multimedia specialists. However, there are other tools available, such as H5P, that will allow you to create very simple interactive objects fairly quickly, and you can then embed those in your course. And we had a session last week about using H5P, and I suspect there will be some more sessions coming up in the spring if you'd like to learn more about it at that time. And there was a question came through in the chat. So Sherry is sharing that her weekly online tutorials in the online rooms has worked really well with her students in math, because they can see her work out any questions and all the steps included. Exactly. And so you can use the whiteboard that's there, or if you have a document camera, you can turn that on and then have that projected to the whiteboard and work through the problems and show students the steps involved and the areas perhaps even where some students tend to make a mistake and how to avoid them. And you could also turn over the controls to a student so that they could work through, and you could coach them along as well. That may be somewhat dependent on the size of the class or how many people are joining the tutorial. Thanks, Sherry. That's a great idea. Exactly. Good stuff. Okay, so we're going to look at some feedback tools in Brightspace itself. And Daph is going to start us off with a few feedback methods that we've pulled together in a tidy little chart. And then we're going to show you some very specific examples of ways to provide feedback in Brightspace itself. Okay, Daph.
Thank you, Jane. So if we look at the assignment tool, and we will, we can provide text feedback, audio that we pre-record and upload, video, and face-to-face or in-person feedback. Online rooms, the same thing. We can provide it by all methods. Discussion forum, we can provide text-based, audio, video, and face-to-face or in person. The video assignment, we tend to use audio or video or in person. Quizzes is usually text-based. Feedback and rubrics are usually text-based feedback or in person. So we'll look at each one of these individually now. And we'll start off with the assignments. So here you'll see that in the assignment tool, there's where student submits, there's an evaluate button, and then you can provide the feedback within the assignment tool itself. So if we look at the next slide, this only works if it's done correctly. So you have to make sure that you remember to save or draft, save your draft or publish for each student. It's a quick way to provide feedback. and it's a quick way for you to access the feedback that you've provided to a particular student. So in the feedback box, you can put in your feedback, and it's quite extensive. You can I don't think there's a limit on how much feedback you can provide within that feedback tool. So it's quite useful. If we look at the next slide, we'll look at providing feedback in online rooms. So we can use emojis by clicking on your name and then clicking on the status, and it will give you a series of options. We can use breakout rooms where we need to provide clear guidance on what's to be done in that breakout room, what the student's task is. Monitor the activities within the breakout room by moving from room to room, providing clarification if there's clarification needed. And make sure you allow time to have the groups report back and then provide feedback on the report backs. If we look at the survey or polls, we can publish the results easily. And students just have to click on A, B, C, D, or E, and you can put in the options A, B, C, D, or E, or red, green, yellow, blue, orange. And then if we look at the chat, it can be saved quite easily. Just by clicking on the save chat and at the public chat level. And that's useful if you have a class and there's a good discussion going there in the chat, or if you're using it during office hours and you've used the chat to highlight some of the important discussion components so that you can share that with the student after, if you haven't recorded your office hour with the student. Sometimes it's awkward to record an office hour with students because other students can drop in. But if you've got a meeting with just one student, it's often nice to record that meeting. We're going to look at discussion forums in Brightspace. So we can provide textual input, video input, audio, visual images or whatever. We need to make sure that when we're using discussion forums that we're present, that we probe for more detail, probe for why a student might have a misconception so that we can correct the misconception, guide the discussion. If it goes off topic too far, then we can pull it back on topic, lead the discussion, and redirect the discussion so that if a student has a major misconception, we can correct that misconception without saying that the student is completely wrong, or if we're going to tell them that they're completely wrong, that we can do it in a polite way. And just remember the art of facilitation. It's so important in an online environment, or particularly in an online environment. because it's so much more difficult to correct an error. If you've said the wrong thing, a student will tune you out pretty quickly. So within the Brightspace, we can insert a variety of different file formats. And we just go click on the arrow that you'll see there within Brightspace, and then you can select a file from your computer or a file from your course offering files. You can add a video note. You can insert a link. You can enter an embedded code. You can use a video search note, a video note search. And I often include an image because it helps to break up or helps to illustrate a point or break up the monotony of text. If we can go to the next slide, we can see that it's quite easy to insert an image just by clicking on the camera there, and we can upload a file there quite nicely. So if we look at feedback in the quiz tool, this is within the question library, where we enter the questions that we'll put into quizzes later. Or if you enter your questions directly into a quiz, there's the opportunity to provide feedback by clicking on the options button at the top of the question, add feedback, and it's quite easy to add your feedback. If we look at the next slide, we'll see that we're adding it to a multiple choice question. The question is, what color is a stop sign? Not a very challenging multiple choice question, and not one that I would encourage you to use at a university level, but it was one that, regardless of what discipline you have or you're from, you'd be able to relate to it. So if a student selects yellow, they get the feedback. If they select red, that's correct, and they get that feedback. And if they select green, then they're provided the feedback. They're not provided the feedback until after you release the results of the quiz, because you don't want students to share their feedback while other students are still writing. So you wait till you provide the results of the quiz, unless it's a self-quiz or a review quiz, in which case, the sooner you provide the results, the better it is. So for a written response question, it's the same sort of thing, except for now you have a text box. And so students have been asked to write an essay or 500 words on their life history. And the feedback goes beyond what's captured here, but you have to scroll down to see more of the feedback. Does anybody have any questions? I'm going to pass it over to Jane, who's going to talk about the video and audio, or the video assignment in Brightspace.
Great, thanks, Steph. So video assignment is relatively new to Brightspace, and what it does, it allows students to create if their assignment involves a video, perhaps it's like a presentation that they would normally give in front of their peers in the classroom, or it's part of a debate and there's multiple students involved, or you can use the video assignment, ask students to record their contribution or their assignment, their submission, upload it here through the video assignment tool, and you get to see how many videos then have been viewed. So how many not viewed, how many are viewed, how many are in progress, people are still working on. And one feature of the video assignment tool is that you can allow students to give each other feedback on the work, and that can contribute towards the grade of the assignment, or they can give the feedback and then the person who created the submission can take that feedback to update it and then submit their final copy to you for the ultimate grading. And so this here we see basically it's it shows the progress of our, allows you to monitor the progress of the work that's being done. So there were 18 students in this class, 13 have submitted their papers, 13 still need evaluation, so it's with the instructor to be evaluated, and none have been finally published. Published in this case refers to their scores being published. And then you would get a list of all the names down here and then the status of where they are, whether they viewed something, whether they're in progress, or whether they've completed their feedback, and whether you completed the evaluation. But you can release the marks for all of the video assignments at one time, and it is linked directly to the gradebook. So Daph touched upon it earlier, the notion of using rubrics, and there are lots of great rubrics out there on the internet that you're able to use. Many have a Creative Commons license attached, and that will help you identify basically the license or how you can use the rubric. Many of them you can modify, which is great. And so this is a screen capture of a preview of a rubric that was set up, and there's a little bit of humor in the rubric itself, but its main purpose is to show you how you would have your criteria, which are down the left-hand column, and then across the top row, then you would have what would constitute full marks, then pretty good job, something that it's okay, and then what would constitute a terrible submission. And as you select whichever cell for each of the criteria, then your score for that item, for that student, is then calculated, and it gives you the total out of 16. And then the overall score, you would see how many they could get at a level 4, at level 3, 2, and 1. So it just allows them to have an understanding of then where they fit with other people. If you want to edit the rubric, I thought I'd just show you the if you want to set it up or edit it, what it looks like from behind the scenes. And so you can change how many points something is worth, how many columns there are, how much criteria or criterion are being used. And all the fields are editable. Okay. And one really nice thing is once you create a rubric and you're happy with it, then of course you can copy it forward to another Brightspace shell. Another fairly new tool that we have now, which has also been integrated into Brightspace, is called peer feedback. We're using a tool called Peer Scholar for peer feedback. And the peer feedback is for students, maybe they have a paper, or it could also be a video. Instead of using the video assignment, they could use this system. So the students would upload their assignments, and which is the create portion, and then they would then provide feedback to the stipulated number of their classmates on their own work, and they would upload that. It is possible to allow the students to enter a grade or suggest a grade as well. And then the students, and then you can grade the item, and then you could stop right there. Or you could allow the students to take all the feedback that they've received, improve their paper, and submit a final version for your review and your grading. Okay. The students, when they're providing feedback to their peers, they not only are seeing how other students are interpreting the content and applying it, but it also helps them realize areas that they know and they're very comfortable with, and areas that they still need to do some work on. So there's benefits both in giving feedback and in receiving the feedback. And within peer feedback in any situation here with teaching and learning, there are certain transferable skills that come from the peer review or the peer feedback process. And some of these, for example, critical thinking, communication, both expressive and receptive, collaboration, and that is a very sought after skill. And of course, metacognition, being aware of your own state, your own learning, where you excel and where you have challenges. And then the other one, of course, which was creative thinking, finding ways even to provide the feedback to your peer in a constructive manner. We do have resources available for people to help with any of these tools or many of these technologies, and you can find different types of help. The technology resource site at CITL, all of these are at CITL. This provides you with the how-to documentation on the various tools and technologies. The instructional resources site provides you with background on basically why would I use this, or why would I do that? Like why would I use video? Why would I write learning outcomes a specific way? And of course, on our instructional resources site, we have a section that's dedicated to remote instruction. And we had been working on that since last spring, well, this time last year when we moved over to remote instruction. And we still continue to add resources to that today. So we had a look at what feedback was, why to give it, when to give it, how to give it, some technologies that you could use when providing feedback, and some tools within Brightspace that could be used for providing feedback, a variety of different tips throughout the way, and that leaves us with just one other thing. This is an infographic about 20 ways to provide effective feedback for learning. It's from Teach Thought. So if you were to do a search for Teach Thought effective feedback, then I'm sure you will find this infographic. And much of what we've said today is noted or presented here in a different way. Okay, and so any other questions for us today?
Yes, I have a question. The one that you mentioned last, the peer feedback, is it available on the assignment folder?
The peer feedback, so that is a tool that you have to activate within Brightspace. Basically, just provide the link to it, and so your class list will then automatically be added to the Peer Scholar tool, and you can use it. So that way. So there are resources on how to set it up, and you can always reach out to client support if you need specific help, or to well, myself or Daph or Justina, and we'll help connect you with someone who can work with you to get it implemented.